Welcome back to the Deep Dive Podcast. Today we're going to be breaking down some Week 6 PICKEMS at the very end, so stay tuned for that. And we're going to be talking about some close calls over Week 5, as well as some more previews for this week. So first thing we're going to talk about today is some close calls in the Big 12 Conference, or just kind of some things that are under the weather a little bit. BYU versus Colorado. Obviously, that was a very, very close call for BYU, especially being down 14-0 in the first quarter against Colorado. Not ideal, but BYU found a way to get back in the game and to eventually win it 24-21. Colorado was up 14-0, I think, in the first, 10 minutes of the ball game. I think like 5:30 left, and Colorado was 14-0. Honestly, kind of looked like Colorado was going to run away with it a little bit. And I think Salter was playing quarterback that game for Colorado. But BYU turned it around, got the win. Next game we're going to talk about is Kansas State versus UCF. K-State won that one. A little bit bigger than I think most people were expecting. Now, I'm not saying UCF is necessarily a great team in any way, because they're not. They're a solid team. But Kansas State, I wonder if they're starting to kind of figure out the game of football a little bit. Avery Johnson went 18 for 26, only 168 yards passing. But he looked... To me, it looked like he looked a lot more comfortable. I feel like the game against Iowa State over in Ireland, Avery looked the most comfortable this season in that game until the UCF game. Obviously, he passed for more yards against Iowa State. But I think the game against UCF, Avery definitely looked comfortable again for the first time since the Iowa State game over in Ireland. That's enough for Week 6. We're going to move on, or Week 5, excuse me. We're going to move on to Week 6 and talk about some of the games this week. Week 6 is upon us. I'm recording this a little bit before Saturday, before the BYU West Virginia game as well, so I'm not going to be able to tell you who won the BYU West Virginia game, but you can also Google it, or if you have the ESPN app, I'm sure you probably know by now. But BYU versus West Virginia, biggest key for BYU is their defense against a struggling West Virginia squad. I don't see, personally, when I look at this game, I know BYU, we just talked about them struggling with Colorado in an early game, turned it around in the second half, and really after the first 10 minutes of the BYU-Colorado game. But I just don't see BYU struggling with West Virginia at all. They very well could, but I just don't see it being that way. It's a Friday 9 o'clock kickoff, I believe, or 9:30, something like that. So I see BYU. I think it could very well even be BYU 14-0. Same thing that happened to them on Saturday last week against Colorado. I think it could be BYU 14, West Virginia nothing in the first 6, 7, 8 minutes of the ball game. Iowa State at Cincinnati, whose defense can get stops. I've talked about this on both of my other episodes that I posted a lot. That's been one of my main things this week, is talking about this game, because I think it's huge. If you have watched either two, you know that I'm an Iowa State fan, so I'm going to be a little bit biased towards Iowa State. But yeah, I think it's going to be important for which defense can get stops. I also mentioned this in the podcast on Thursday morning, that Cincinnati ranks outside the top 100 for defense. So I think Iowa State's defense is going to be able to get stops. I think Iowa State's defense ranks in the definitely top 40. I can't remember exactly what number they're at there. But yeah, whose defense can get stops is going to be crucial in that game, I think. Kansas State at Baylor. My takeaway from this preview is Avery Johnson, again. I think it's going to be a determining factor in this one, is going to be, can Avery Johnson exploit Baylor's secondary with his arms or his legs? We saw against when Baylor played Auburn, Jackson Arnold, the Oklahoma transfer, he ran crazy on Baylor's defense. I mean, so I think if Avery Johnson, get a few throws under his belt, and have that Baylor defense dropping back, that could be really, really important for Kansas State in this game, especially if Avery Johnson wants to get out and run. That could definitely be, I think, probably one of the biggest determining factors of who wins this game between Kansas State and Baylor. Oklahoma State at Arizona. Arizona bounce back game. Fafita bounce back game. He definitely looked very shaky as an Iowa State fan watching that game. Fafita definitely looked very much under pressure pretty much the entire game. I do look for Fafita. I don't think this game's going to be even close, and I'll get to my pick'ems in just a second. But I don't think Arizona's going to have any problem with Oklahoma State at all. Texas Tech at Houston. Connor Weigman under pressure and how he responds and reacts to the Texas Tech defense. I think this is going to be by far the biggest, most important thing to this game possible is how does Connor Weigman react to the Texas Tech defense when they blitz, when they're coming down at you hard. How does Connor Weigman react? Even when they're running the ball, how does he react to it? I think Connor Weigman is going to be having to play his absolute A game in this. And that's my biggest takeaway for, if Tech can get to Connor Weigman quick and they can make him feel like he's under pressure the whole game, I think Tech would probably win that game pretty easily if it's going to be a game kind of like that where the Tech defense just takes over, which is very possible. Houston's defense is also pretty solid too, so I look for Houston to put a lot of pressure on Baron Morton as well. Colorado at TCU. I don't think, obviously, I was just talking about Colorado BYU the first 10 minutes of that game. Colorado was up 14-0. They had some big defensive plays, but I think the biggest thing in this game is going to be, can TCU hit explosive plays against Colorado? And Colorado does give up quite a few explosive plays, and I think TCU definitely can. I think it's more so of just how consistent can they be on offense against Colorado's defense, but I think that is definitely going to be the biggest point by far in this game is if they can hit explosive plays, whether it's deep shots or whether it's running the ball for 10 plus yards at a time, and wear the Colorado defense out. That's going to be massive in this game. Last one for previews is Kansas at UCF. Who wins the rushing battle / line of scrimmage? Kansas ranks Kansas ranks bad in third down conversions. So I think it's going to be, UCF, can you get your defense off the field? It's kind of the same thing as Colorado and TCU, who can wear whose defense down first. I do think for Kansas, though, you're going to have a Jalen Daniels bounce back game this weekend after losing to Cincinnati. I said this in the last episode, I believe, that I took there's a 6-point spread. Kansas is favored by 6 points. I think that's way too close, to be honest. I think, personally, when I'm looking at this game, when I think about who wins the rushing battle, who wins the trenches, I think Kansas ultimately will dominate UCF, and I think they're definitely going to control time of possession. But I'm going to get into that in a little bit. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the next segment, which is Pick'ems. I actually skipped a segment. We're going to talk about the best quarterbacks and how their play is going to affect the games this week. First one we're going to talk about is Josh Hoover, who is probably the most underrated quarterback in this conference. Gets talked about less than some of these guys on my list. Josh Hoover, seriously, last year had an incredible year. I think he can affect this week's game against Colorado in a huge way. We were just talking about that game and explosive plays. I definitely think that Josh Hoover is going to go crazy for passing yards and completions. And you take a look at, Josh Hoover and his receivers, it's almost no question that they're going to be able to have some explosive plays against this Colorado defense. Next one is Baron Morton for Texas Tech, who is back playing after the injury. again, kind of the same thing too. Like, I think he's going to be able to hit some explosive plays against Houston's defense. And these are in no particular order, but I just kind of wanted to do something else for this podcast of taking the top 4 quarterbacks playing this week for this conference. Most interesting to watch, but I definitely think Barrymore has to be, of course, on the top of the list for Texas Tech. So yeah, and then the quarterback battle is Rocco Becht and Brennan Sorsby. I talked about this a bunch yesterday, so I'm not going to get into it a ton, but Rocco Becht obviously has had a very, very, very solid start to the year, same with Brennan Sorsby. But Rocco Becht, last week against Arizona, I believe he had like 243 yards or something like that, around that area. I definitely look for Rocco to hit some explosive plays against Cincinnati, and same for Brennan Sorsby. I expect him to make some explosive plays against Iowa State. And this Rocco Becht versus Brennan Sorsby, I mean, this could really be a huge matchup. Just which quarterback does better in this game. Like, it genuinely could come down to that. I think Iowa State, obviously, when you look at the run game, definitely has a little bit more experience there. But Rocco Becht versus Brennan Sorsby, I mean, that is going to be an amazing battle on Saturday. Okay, I'm recording this a separate day, but before we get into PICKEMS, I just saw this. It's 7 o'clock at Friday. I thought this was absolutely astounding, so I just kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit before I get into PICKEMS. But talking about Iowa State and Cincinnati, I just wanted to address something real quick, because if one person said it, multiple people probably believe it. I saw this video, and I'm going to give you guys the exact direct quote. I could not believe that I heard someone say this about Iowa State. But this quote said, and we're going to break this down a little bit before we get into the next segment. But the exact quote was, Iowa State leaves a lot of question marks on the offensive side of the ball, especially in the run game. They only averaged 2.4 yards per carry against Arizona, who's a bad rushing defense. Iowa State is averaging 3 yards per carry, which is a little under the national average, which is 4.2 to 4.6 yards a carry. I will say this, as an Iowa State fan, our rushing yards per carry have not been as good as expected, but I don't think the other comment that I saw with this was Iowa State's just an overall bad team on the ground, which being 0.4 yards per rush under the national average apparently makes you really bad at rushing nowadays. I did not know that. I think it's astounding that people are going to say that about Iowa State. And we're going to take a look at some stats here, okay? First off, let's talk about Cincinnati. And by all means, if Cincinnati, if this game proves me wrong, then it proves me wrong, okay? So that's kind of why I wanted to get this out before. Again, if this game proves me wrong, this game proves me wrong. Maybe Iowa State does have a worse running game than I think that they do. But personally, when you look at the stats, I still don't, okay? Cincinnati, yards per carry defensively, so stopping the run, is 76th nationally, okay? Just keep that in mind. We're going to go through some of the other teams that we've played. Not going to include Arkansas State and South Dakota, just because I did not really want to. But the 3 Power 4 teams that they've played, okay? Let's start off with Kansas State. Surprisingly, this is very surprising, Kansas State's rushing defense is 30th nationally, okay? Iowa State, I don't remember what they had 4 yards on the ground in that game, but Kansas State rushing defense is ranked 30th nationally, okay? Arizona's rushing defense, actually no, let's go Iowa. Iowa's rushing defense, they're always really, really good for stopping the run. They're ranked 6th nationally, okay? Most people probably knew that, and I think Iowa's actually lower than they've been. I think in the past couple of years, they've been like number 1 or number 2 or number 3. So they're actually not as good as they are, but obviously 6th. Still really good. Now let's go to Arizona, because this is the quote. This is the part of the quote that they said Iowa State only averaged 2.4 yards against Arizona, who's a bad rushing defense, stopping the run. Arizona's rushing defense is ranked 29th nationally. So to say that Iowa State's running game is bad when they've gone up against 3 teams in the top 30 for stopping the run, I'm just not really seeing how we're not connecting the dots with, they played really good teams that are good at they played teams that are really good at stopping the run. 3 teams that are in the top 30 at stopping the run in the country. So yeah, our rushing game and most teams that have an average, I think if Iowa State, then like I said, Cincinnati's ranked 76th nationally. Who knows? Maybe Cincinnati might prove me wrong today. But I was really kind of I could not believe my eyes when I came across this video. Because again, you go and look at the stats and you're like, okay, Iowa State, who have they played? Okay, they've played Arizona, Kansas State, Iowa, 3 Power 4 schools. Well, what are their ranks for stopping the run? And you look and you see they're all in the top 30. So I don't know if anyone's talking about this at all anywhere else on any of their podcasts or anything, but when I look at that, it's kind of just Iowa State normally has a really good run game, and I know that we do have some question marks with our running game. I will say that, just a few. But also, the other part of this quote that I don't understand is Iowa State leaves a lot of question marks on the offensive side of the ball, especially in the run game. So we're talking about our offensive line, which is proven it. We're talking about Rocco Becht. I'm sure they don't mean Rocco Becht. But even our wide receivers. I know we had a lot of questions with wide receivers the first couple of games, but did we not just see Chase Sowell ball out against Arizona? I think, personally, he might ball out today against Cincinnati. I think Xavier Townsend might ball out today against Cincinnati. Again, we're looking at... Cincinnati's defense is just not as talented as the other defenses that we've played this year. And I think Iowa State is going to really take advantage of that. So, a little bit of breaking news segment here, but we'll get you guys over to PICKEMS next. And our last little segment of the day, I know this is Big 12 podcast, but I wanted to throw in some other games going on around the country for PICKEMS today. But we're going to go through them a little bit. I know that I do have a Big 12 flag now, but I am going to branch out a little bit and, just give some PICKEMS on some other games. The first one I have is Clemson and North Carolina. I think Cade Klubnik is going to get it done against North Carolina's Bill Belichick's North Carolina team. I think North Carolina might have been favored in that game. I could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, hopefully I'm not wrong by a ton. Hopefully Clemson's not favored by 20, and I just said that because that would not be ideal. Texas is favored against Florida. I think Florida, DJ Lagway are going to get it done against Texas. I believe Texas was a 2-point favorite or something around there last time that I checked. I think Florida's going to get it done against Texas. Florida is the home team. Texas, this is their first road game since their loss at Ohio State, I think. Again, I'm a Big 12, so I don't pay attention to these teams too much, especially Texas, because they're an old Big 12 team. But I definitely think Florida's going to get it done against Texas this Saturday. Bama over Vanderbilt. Battle of 2 ranked teams. I think this might be the only... there's Miami and Florida State's also a ranked game. Ty Simpson and Diego Pavia, I think, this could come down to which quarterback plays better. I'm honestly not super high on Bama. Regardless of their Florida State loss, I'm still not very high on Bama. Just Kalen DeBoer this new era of Alabama football has not been what a lot of people expected it to be, I don't think. So, but my personal opinion, I do think Alabama is going to get it done. I think Ty Simpson is going to ball out against the Vanderbilt defense. I do think Vanderbilt is very, very good, though. And, they might surprise some people. They did it 2 years ago, I think, when they beat Alabama, or maybe that was just last year. Maybe it was even longer ago because I can't remember what year it was now, but I know that Vanderbilt did beat Alabama recently. I do know that much. So, next one I have is Louisville over Virginia. I know Virginia just got into the top 25. Louisville's also receiving some votes, though. So that'll be another interesting game for you guys to watch if you're not watching the Big 12. And then the late night, I think this could also be wrong. Now that I said that, I think it's wrong. But Miami over Florida State. I think Miami's defense shuts down Florida State's offense. I don't think this game ends up being very close, just because of how good Miami's defense is this year. I don't see this game being close. I really don't. I think Miami's going to get some turnovers very early in the game, and I think they're going to put up a lot of points right away as well. Now we're going to move on to the Big 12, where we're going to talk about every game and a little bit more in depth, even though I kind of just did that. BYU over West Virginia. We'll know this one soon. We'll know this one before this episode even comes out. I think BYU dominates in every aspect. I don't think this game's even close. I think BYU comes away with a massive, massive victory over West Virginia. I'm talking like 30, 40 points win. Like, I'm not talking about like a 10-point win that they just came back from being down 14 in the first quarter. I'm talking about they start out hot and they stay hot the entire game and they just dominate every single aspect. Next one is Iowa State over Cincinnati. I tried to keep my bias as little as possible. But like I was talking about a little bit ago in the podcast yesterday, this is going to be an offensive battle. I also said the over-under was 55, I believe. Way over. I think this seriously could be like a 42-35, 42-38 kind of a game. But I do think Iowa State is going to make bigger plays to win. I like Iowa State's offensive line against the Cincinnati defensive line. And I also like Iowa State's defensive line against Cincinnati's offensive line. I think Iowa State's much better in the trenches than Cincinnati is. This might be my shocker. I have Kansas State going on the road to beat Baylor. And again, I'm saying this because Avery and company, you look at what Auburn and Jackson Arnold did to Baylor secondary. I believe that was a 45-28 finish, 42-28 finish, something like that. But Avery Johnson, I've never been super high on Avery Johnson, I will say that. But going up against this Baylor secondary, I think Kansas State could be figuring some things out. I truly do think that they could be figuring some things out. And I think a lot of it is going to come from Avery. In this game, I think he's going to get a lot. I think Avery Johnson could go over 100 yards rushing in this game. That's just, again, when you look at what Jackson Arnold did to this Baylor defense, and Jackson Arnold kind of came, I don't want to say out of nowhere because he played at Oklahoma last year, but I don't think a lot of people expected that to happen. At least not me. And a lot of the people that I pay attention to did not expect Jackson Arnold to just run over Baylor's defense like that. But yeah, I got Kansas State in a big upset win at Baylor. I do think Sawyer Robertson plays very, very well. He was the other quarterback that I was going to talk about, but I forgot to. Now that I'm looking at my notes again in that section. But yeah, I think Kansas State definitely comes away with a big-time win. Not a 40-point win, not a 30-point win. I'm talking about 2, 3, 4-point win at Baylor. Next one we have is Arizona over Oklahoma State. Kind of touched on this a little bit. Not going to say a whole lot about this, but I definitely think Arizona. Oklahoma State's just bad. You just fired your coach, Mike Gundy. And Oklahoma State actually put up a decent fight against Baylor last week, but I think Arizona, this is a huge bounce back game for them. I think Arizona gets it done very, very easily this Saturday. Texas Tech over Houston in a low-scoring defensive game, but I think Baron Morton and Tech's offense prevails late. And I'm talking late. I think this game is going to be pretty neck and neck. I don't see Texas Tech, unless Texas Tech explodes on offense the entire game, I see this thing being very close. like a one-score game by a touchdown or field goal the entire way through until the very end. And I think Texas, again, this is just another one of those games where it's going to be one in the trenches, but also with explosive plays. Who can make plays on offense that score? It's kind of going to be the opposite of an Iowa State Cincinnati game, where it's who can make the defensive stops. But I do have Texas Tech beating Houston in that one. TCU over Colorado. I was just talking about this one a little bit as well. I don't see Colorado's defense being able to handle TCU's offense and Josh Hoover very easily. And the last one that I have is Kansas over UCF, Daniels bounce back game. I think Kansas gets off to a solid start in this game. UCF's defense is definitely shaky. I think Jalen Daniels exploits it pretty fast, though. Again, I know that I was just talking about this, but I'm going to restate this again, because this is, out of everything that I've said in this whole entire ordeal, I think this is probably the biggest thing, is Kansas being a 6-point favorite at UCF. I think is a little crazy. I'm not going to lie. I think Kansas seriously could walk in to Orlando and walk out with like a 21-point win. I could be completely wrong. UCF could keep it very close the whole game, and UCF could pull out a late game winning field goal. But when I look at Kansas and UCF on paper, Kansas by far should win this game by at least a touchdown, which is still covering the spread of 6. At least the last time I looked at it. Maybe it's changed. I don't know. But I definitely do think Kansas will have a dominant performance in the trenches in this game, even if it is close. But that's all we got for today. My next episode will be recapping all of these games that I just talked about and what I did wrong and what I did right for these games, what I predicted, if my predictions were right or wrong. But yeah, that is it for this episode. We will see you guys in the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Big 12 Deep Dive, the podcast where we break down everything Big 12 football and basketball.